Good interactive session with our panel last year. We have a complete different set of folks this year, so you guys hopefully will have a lot of questions for them. I want to introduce to you a new person that you've not seen their face yet. Well, I guess you've seen his face, but he hasn't been properly introduced. That sits on our panel on the far left is Dr. Peter Burrell. Dr. Burrell is a senior environmental scientist with Marine Research and Consulting Incorporation. He's a native of Melbourne and received his PhD in environmental sciences from Florida Institute of Technology. Worked from his postdoc at Harbor Branch Oceanographic Institute was used to revise the Everglades Restoration Plan, and his work on human-derived nutrients and linkages to harmful algal blooms has been used to set nutrient criteria in Florida surface waters, as well as drive policy and legislation to mitigate nutrient loading in aquatic ecosystems. That's a long sentence to say on a Friday afternoon. But he's a past member of the Florida Senate Task Force on Fertilizer Use and its fate in Florida's aquatic ecosystems. Welcome, Dr. Burrell. Wow, that's different. I'll just reintroduce the folks that you guys met earlier. Don Fox on the left. He works for FWC on Lake Okeechobee, and you can ask him questions about aquatic habitat restoration. We just heard from Dwayne DeFries from Aquafiber. We've got Dr. Peter Frederick there from the Everglades, University of Florida, Everglades and Wading Birds, and then Dr. Lynn Geddes, who did the eelgrass and the revegetation studies. So what we have, we had thin pickings, slim pickings, I guess, in our panel discussion questions. So you guys are either going to get off easy or they want to just put you on the hot seat. So I picked out some questions that are more broad. We had some real specific questions, but I just picked out a few that seem to be more broad. I'll start at the first one, and any panelists can, raise their hand, chime in. We can take, answers from multiple panelists as well. And if nobody knows, then I don't know what we do. But the question is, will water movement from the water management areas to Taylor Slough impact the Indian River and St. Lucie River problems? Anybody want to take that? Don's laughing. Are these mics on?
Wasn't laughing yesterday. Other than the 200,000, was it 250? I'm going to look at George and Pete to help me here. They're right numbers. Was it 250,000 acre feet that's going to go, I think, south from the lake, but and that's out of the lake, depending on the lake level, that's roughly 6 inches of water. But at the rate we're getting, at the volume of water we have now, the answer would be no. There would still be half the water go to east and west. They can't, if they have to move it through the flow equalization basin and the STAs, to clean it up before it goes south, because of the nutrient load in the water will not beat the 10 ppm coming from the lake. So you can't move raw lake water directly south. It has to go through the STAs, and you hit their capacity very soon.
Great. Any other input? Okay.
So yeah, second answer to that is at current lake levels, you won't feel any difference. You're absolutely right. At lower lake levels, and on average, it's conceivable that you might get a little bit less discharge to the IRL, just because you are removing that much. It's giving a little bit more buffer to the system.
Great. All right, you guys in the audience, be thinking about your questions here. We only have a few more. Are shorebirds included in the Everglades Restoration Plan? How will migratory habitat in the EAA be replaced when much of this area is transformed to water storage and treatment areas? So kind of two parts. Are shorebirds included in the Everglades Restoration Plan? And then how will the migratory habitat be replaced when they become stormwater treatment areas?
So as far as I'm aware, shorebirds are not a direct indicator for the Everglades Restoration Plan. And unlike the long-legged wading birds, it doesn't mean that we're ignoring them. It just means that they're not as high focus. I guess the second part of the question is, what's going to happen to shorebirds when the stormwater treatment areas do what?
When much of the EAA is replaced by stormwater treatment areas.
Everglades agriculture areas become. Yeah, right now the stormwater treatment areas seem to be pretty darn good habitat for a lot of water birds. And depending upon where you are within those STAs, Some parts of that are very good for shorebirds. Land that didn't used to be good for shorebirds. So I guess that's my answer. What do you think?
Great, thanks. Okay, what are the current plans for the Apopka North Shore relative to restoration, and how might it impact birds and waterfowl? Anybody from the district here? St. John's? Yeah. Dr. John Basili was a panelist last year and a previous speaker. I can just tell you that there are plans for the North Shore, and I'm not sure what they are, but they're working on it, and they're spending lots of money. And I think the hope is that they'll be doing some management there to, yeah, well, probably decades, I'm sure. But yeah, at least initially, the Duda track, which is kind of in the center there, is the cleanest site. And the idea, I think, would be to put water on, move water on and off. We heard about pulses and the dynamics, and from previous speakers in the summit, we know that you got to have highs and lows and dries and wet cycles, and they're well aware of that. So I think the idea is that whether it's active or semi-active management, they'll move towards that direction for the North Shore, within the bounds of the contaminant issues that they have and the remediation for that. So.
Well, I also know that there's a lot of legislative intent. We've had a lot of phone calls in the last month or so about, getting some additional funding for Apopka. Right now, my understanding is that the districts, the managed wetland with the alum treatment hasn't operated now for a while because the water levels are too low, and they were, relying on gravity flow to get that. But there's some funding, I think, on the map for some technology testing. I don't know who got that contract, but seems like Apopka interest for expanded restoration has elevated in the political discussions up in Tallahassee. So I think that's good news.
Right. So for those of you that don't know, I don't remember if we talked about this last year at the summit, but our agency is part of a group that got, and I'm going to look at Bruce Jaggers in the back and put him on the spot. There's several $1 million for 5 years, what, $3 million for 5 years? I'm just making up a number, but that's going into Lake Apopka proper to try to clean it up. And we've got some vegetation efforts and those kind of things, right? Is that right, about $3 million for 5 years, or?
It was $4.8 million over about 3 years, and then this last session there was another $2 million.
Okay, so a lot of money going into the lake proper. So there's both the lake proper, which has a lot of political ramifications and interests, and then the North Shore, which is the marsh to the north, obviously inside the levees there that were old vegetable farms. So great, okay. Let's see. We'll take a question from the audience now. How's that? Let me bring you the mic.
We've got billions of projects lined up that need to be done, and everybody squeaks their wheel for their own particular interests. I'd like to have some kind of discussion of what you really think our priorities should be. Where should we be spending the next $1 billion or hundreds of millions of dollars that we may have available?
Are you talking about for the Everglades or the whole state, or?
Yeah, you gotta talk about those.
So statewide wetland restoration dollars.
Whether it's the springs up north or whether it's the Key West or whether it's the coastal estuaries. So that's a priority.
I'll take a quick stab at that because we've had to address that on the estuarine side a little bit. The key for me is, we shouldn't be incrementally spending money on small projects that don't make a difference. So size matters, but also ecological, and this concept of, the human concept is really important here, that, if you put your money into what I would call a statewide high priority area, where you get multiple species use or kind of a suite of species, like for example, if it's a waterfowl project that has statewide national significance, I think that's the way to go. That, you could burn $1 billion doing small urban lakes. It wouldn't be a bad thing, but it isn't going to get you the kind of ecological integrity. And let's face it, you're going to do it one water body at a time. And I worry that with all of this backyard interest, do it in my district, and let's start on this lake. that you could burn through a lot of money and still have no net positive ecological benefit on the larger scale.
That's very similar to the approach we took on Okeechobee with our Northwest Marsh Priority Area. You know, being a small agency, limited resources, I could have done little projects all over the lake. And at the end, I'd have had little projects all over the lake that really didn't matter anything. So we took the approach of tying everything together. I think on a statewide basis, $1 billion sounds like a lot of money, but it's not. You know, we have non-functional reservoirs for the Indian River Lagoon that cost $130 million that are sitting there empty. You know, it doesn't take many of those to burn through $1 billion. I think what we need to do is it's hard to do in the political environment because, as he mentioned, everybody wants, you know, something in their backyard. Is we need to pick a project, see it to the end, and move on, and get completion and get something in the ground. It was brought up at the RAC meeting yesterday that Apopka was actually brought up that Lawton Childs had the first major big project in 1996 to get Apopka squared away, and you know Apopka's no more squared away today than it was in 1996. We need to start and get to the end, get some closure on some things.
I think, you know, on a conceptual basis, it's certainly been a theme of this meeting and in the past summits, is that in terms of a target, that if we get the water right, then the ecosystems will respond. I think we saw several examples of that today. So in terms of what are the greater needs, you know, I agree with the issue that we don't want to just fix one pond or lake at a time. But if we address the issue of the factors that are causing decline in ecosystems that from the very base, and we've identified, you know, eutrophication of springs, rivers, and coastal estuaries in the state as all being impaired. If we went to the root of the problem, and maybe these are really larger land management issues that need to be tackled. We know when we restore water quality that things follow suit and improve from there.
If we're allowed to take a really broad view, I would say that most of our problems really stem from water use. In Florida, we're really lucky. We've got a lot of water. We've got a lot of water underneath us. We've got a lot of rainfall. We've got water that a lot of nations would kill for. But we have a really bad habit of how to use it. The only difference between Floridians and Arizonans is that the Arizonans were brought up to conserve water. If they weren't, they're facing a really horrendous water bill at the end of the day. To me, if we can spend money to educate the public and help find technological solutions to using so much water, that will take the relief off of the vast majority of what we care about.
But that's tied to population also, and I think in the past week it's come to bear that we're over 19 million people in the state of Florida, and I believe it's the third largest state in the country. So if the projections follow through by 2050, we're going to have so much population here that certainly the use, the quality of the water, and the quantity and the cycling of it is just going to become a greater and greater issue. So there's no doubt that we've got to get a handle on certainly use of water, but also, as many pointed out, the treatment of water and the quality of it when it goes into our coastal waters or inland ecosystems.
All right, next question from the audience. It's not a test, it's not a quiz. Okay, coming back here.
I live in the Sebastian Inlet District, and our river grass, mullet grass, is pretty much 90% wiped out right now. And I'm just wondering if this is going to continue all the way down the entire Indian River, and who's studying it, and is there any end in sight?
You want to take a crack, Pete? You take a first crack, and then I'll jump in.
John, a friend of mine, and the Indian River Lagoon is 150 miles long. There are several different stressors. We have agricultural effects. We have urban effects. We know the lagoon has been changing for several decades. We've seen increase in macroalgae and demise of seagrasses going back several decades. So we've been moving toward a phase shift that we know has been mediated by nutrient availability. We've seen demise in systems like Florida Bay, when water quality and water quantity has changed over the past several decades, and we've seen some very predictable ecosystem responses. What's happening in the Indian River Lagoon is no different than what's happened in places like the Chesapeake Bay, which suffered from immense amounts of wastewater and upland land alteration. So what's going on in the lagoon is not a mystery. Going back to my last comment, it comes down to how we choose to manage land and manage wastewater, fertilizer, and our water quality upstream.
And when you have a system that has multiple stressors at different spatial temporal scales, trying to find a cause and effect, there's a lot of speculation right now with the seagrass disappearance. I think we're up to, 30,000 acres now, or is it more than that gone? I've fished on that lagoon for 35 years, and especially in one location. And you may know Dr. Marty Main and I, when we fish, it's not for fun, it's a chore. We're covering territory. I've never seen that system, let's say in a couple of mile radius of walking, where not only are there no blades of grass, we dug probably 20 handfuls looking for rhizoids, couldn't find rhizoids. And that has happened over, really a year or two period. And so my cautionary note actually goes back to, the two science research projects we saw, this afternoon. The only way you're going to understand this moment in Indian River Lagoon history is going to be from a longer historical perspective on the cause relationship. But it doesn't detract from exactly what Peter said, that this system is under stress. There are multiple stressors we know that need to be remediated. If next year all of a sudden seagrass pops back and flourishes in 15,000 acres of the 30 that it's lost, it's a wonderful opportunity to understand the complexities of a very complex ecosystem that, unlike almost any in the United States or the world, is really variable because of its zoogeographic position, shallow nature. And so there's a lot we don't know about this system. But this has been a very confounding episode of seagrass loss that I think has got everybody a bit challenged.
And also keep in mind, it isn't just seagrass loss, as you suggested. Again, we've seen escalating algal blooms in this system, starting with macroalgae, becoming the dominant macrophyte, taking over seagrass beds. We've seen novel phytoplankton blooms. We've had toxic dinoflagellates. We've had species that were exotic from, I think there was a species, Pyridinium from the Philippines. So we are in a day and age now with all these factors going on right now where we're seeing exotic blooms, we're seeing biomass blooms that's unprecedented. And again, these weren't features historically that were common in the lagoon. We've got, your family going back several generations, people know that that lagoon was dominated by sand bottoms. It didn't have a veneer of organic matter up and down the lagoon to the point where it needs to be dredged out. So we've altered this system by altering the upland drainage going back 80 years. The same dredges that were used to dredge the Panama Canal were brought into the Indian River Lagoon system, and we dug C-54, we dug all these major pathways to literally drain the St. John's Basin and send it to the Indian River Lagoon. And that's something that was not going on 100 years ago. It's something that happened in the past 80 years. So all these changes, we've altered the size of the watershed lagoon. We've increased it by like 6 times in the past 50 years. So what we're seeing now is a consequence of all this land alteration. We know that humans' largest population is near the coast. And if you look around Florida and look where the population boom has been, we want to live on the coast. And you can't clear land for agriculture and urbanization the way we have and expect to keep systems like the Indian River Lagoon in a stable state. It's just not going to happen. And one of the points we heard earlier is, we don't have an exact model point where these systems are going to be in 10 or 20 years. But we know they're not going to act the same as they were 20 years ago or 30 years ago. And the other thing is, with the amount of population increase, as I said before, nutrient flux, we can't expect to go back in time to where we were 30, 40, 50, or 100 years ago.
one last point on this. What's interesting, the district just posted a map that's historic seagrass coverage. And actually, it shows this really steady, trend of increasing seagrass coverage and distribution. That if you looked at just that 30-year, portion, you'd be going, gosh, aren't we doing a great job? The system's getting better if you use SAB as the only indicator for ecosystem health.
Seagrass.
Seagrass.
Not SAB.
And well, that's the point
Not macro.
that's the point I'm making. It's seagrass. And then you see this catastrophic 3-year decline. And this is one of the challenges of using single indicators as kind of the sole metric for ecosystem health. A lot of times with these short histories and our narrow perspective and knowledge, with a single indicator, you may not know what you're looking at.
All right, we had one other question back here.
Also on the Indian River Lagoon, I heard a lot about the Everglades restoration wanting to decrease flow into the lagoon, into that estuary, and all the standards for the water that quality has to go into the Everglades. Are there any proposed standards for water that will eventually go from the lake into the lagoon? Or are we planning to just stop it altogether?
Not to my knowledge, that, but the releases that are being made now are under flood control status. That's when the Corps makes releases. They've made releases the last few years to the Caloosahatchee estuary at their request, but there's no legal criteria that's put upon those releases, not like there is with the federal descent decree with one in the Everglades.
But as a follow-up to that, we do have a pretty good handle at this point ecologically what are some of these nutrient thresholds that start driving changes. And we heard about the Everglades, and that at 10 to 15 parts per billion, you see phase shifts from native sawgrass to cattails. And we have a pretty good idea about what the mean concentrations are for nitrogen and phosphorus that cause estuaries where seagrasses become overgrown with epiphytes, and then when macroalgae start taking over. And algae in general have a higher capacity to assimilate nutrients faster than something like a seagrass. So the ability of an algae to outcompete seagrasses is something that can happen at pretty low levels of nutrients. So we think over time the macroalgae in the Indian River Lagoon became dominant because they were just superior at taking up this nutrient loading. And so over time, their biomass became 3+ times the biomass of seagrasses in the system. Before, as Dwayne said, things finally changed.
All right, great. Next question from the audience. All right, I'll give you a minute to think about it. This is my final question from the notes here. Wet prairies in the Everglades are key production areas for apple snails, fish, amphibians, crayfish, etc., for wading birds and kites. Are these important habits being adequately considered in the evaluation of Everglade restoration plans?
Yes.
We can all sleep tonight. Can you expound?
So first off, that notion that they are production sites is very, very well known. I should also add, though, that there's a surprising amount of production going on in sawgrass strands. That is something that didn't really hit the presses for some reason, but it's been known for a fair number of years. Are they adequately protected? I think there's been a lot of thinking in the last couple of years and a lot of experimentation about really the role of what I learned as a wet prairie. Wet prairies are sort of intermediate between a slough that's full of water lilies and a sawgrass strand. And so they're shallower, they've got Elaeochris dominated grasses and so forth. They are apparently, people are coming to believe that they are actually very infrequent in the historical Everglades, that these were places that probably did not exist in great quantity. So it was mostly in the freshwater Everglades, slough or sawgrass strand and not a lot in between. So some of the modeling suggests that by throwing as much water down the slough, down the Central Everglades as we used to have, we're never going to get that much water, by the way, but by doing that, that we would create just the slough, tree island, and sawgrass habitat, and pretty much nothing else in between. What's going to happen if we only throw the 200,000 acre feet down that same area? We're probably still going to retain some of that wet prairie.
All right, thank you.